The system is completely broken, if you were to ask me. The FDA is saying that monoclonal antibodies have not been proven effective against Omicron, and therefore they're removing emergency use authorization for this treatment. In response, in a shocking move, Florida has shut down all of its monoclonal antibody treatment sites. Now, I'm getting all of these individuals on Twitter tweeting at me saying it doesn't stop Omicron. Monoclonal antibodies aren't helping with Omicron, so why should they have it for EUA? I'm like, that's a good question, but that's a question for your doctor. If there is a treatment available that treats COVID, instead of just blanket assuming, well, most people have Omicron, therefore this treatment is no longer available, it makes no sense. The policy is broken. Again, when it comes to medical treatments, you should talk to your doctor. But for most people who are being treated, they are not being given a test to determine whether or not they have Omicron or Delta. And the FDA says that Omicron is 99%, I believe that's their number, I'll pull it up, of cases. And as such, they don't think there's a point in allowing people to get monoclonal antibodies. But I just got to say, man, I don't understand why you would remove the EUA for this treatment, which is effective against Delta and previous strains, simply because there is a dominant strain. That to me is insane. Doctors should be making that decision. So let's say you're in the 1% of individuals who contracts Delta. They're not going to give you this treatment anymore. That is insane. But of course, people don't seem to pay attention to any of this stuff. Look, there are questions about Omicron. But if there are questions about Omicron and monoclonal antibodies, then there are questions about the vaccine and Omicron. Because there have been stories, I'm not even going to say, I'm just going to read this. Fourth Pfizer jab ineffective in blocking Omicron, Israeli study shows. Early findings suggest level of antibodies needed to protect against variant too high for jab to produce. From January 18th, from 1 week ago, this story from the Financial Times. Now, I don't know what this means, other than what the report says. YouTube says they will ban you for questioning this stuff. Well, go talk to your doctor. Don't take your advice from me. How about that? I can only show you the Financial Times. A very prominent and prestigious paper has reported this. And many people have pointed out, well, it may not stop Omicron, but it does reduce the likelihood of hospitalization and death. Sure. Okay. But ultimately, isn't this still something that should be between you and your doctor? Again, just because it's not proven effective against Omicron, you can't get it now if you get Delta. This to me makes literally no sense. But I want you to understand. I want you to understand that wealthy elites still have access to these treatments. I want you to understand that high-profile individuals, famous celebrities, have gotten this treatment. You know, Joe Rogan got monoclonal antibodies. I don't believe they tested Joe Rogan for Delta or Gamma or whatever strain. When I got COVID, I was not given any of those tests either. They did not come to me and say, this may be a new strain or anything like that. They simply said, you got COVID. Here's what we want to give you. It worked, for me at least. And now this was back in October, so it's entirely possible it was not Omicron or, whatever. I don't know what strain it was. All I know is I got sick and the doctor said, here's the treatment. And that's what I got. And it was within 12 hours or so, I was better. I got to tell you, that night was rough, though. The worst illness I've ever had, and I sincerely mean this. That night, after I got monoclonal antibodies and a vitamin drip, NAD, I got this IV treatment. That night was the most excruciating night I had experienced with COVID. It was the worst experience I've ever had with any illness. Now, the most painful thing I've ever had was a wisdom tooth extraction. No joke. Yeah, seriously. Don't ask me why. It was a particularly bad one. That was the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life. I was pale, shaking, covered in sweat, on painkillers, and I didn't think I was going to die from it, but it was just the worst pain I've ever experienced. COVID was bad, but around 4 a.m. it broke. All of a sudden I was better, and I was like, wow, the pain was gone. It's a little sore, a little rough, but just like that. Now, look, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. Maybe the FDA is correct, and maybe what their concern is, and this is a fair point, that if people hear stories like mine about monoclonal antibodies working, they'll, instead of getting any other kind of treatment, or instead of, they'll I'll put it this way, they'll believe they can rely on something that may not actually work. I can totally understand that. The same is true for ivermectin. A lot of people, are proponents of this. They believe it works. And maybe the fear is people will rely on something that they don't know if it works. It's not for me to decide for you. It's for you to talk to your doctor about. My concern, however, is that even if Omicron may be the dominant strain, according to the FDA, they say it is, why take that away from somebody who may be in serious condition and needs any kind of treatment? They say because it will prevent potential side effects. The side effects are extremely mild, according to CNN and the FDA. It's like rashes and diarrhea. So if that's it, and you get it, and it doesn't work, well, you tried, I suppose. I'd assume the IV fluids themselves would probably still be helpful. But again, that's for a doctor to figure out, because, people, I've heard some crazy stories about people doing dumb stuff. We'll put it that way. Here's the story, though. And I don't understand why Florida is shutting the entire thing down. They say Florida is closing its monoclonal antibody treatment sites. Health officials announced late Monday, citing the FDA's decision. Unfortunately, as a result of this abrupt decision made by the federal government, all monoclonal antibody state sites will be closed until further notice. This does make sense. It's not, I think they should remain open, but the FDA isn't just saying don't use it. They're removing the emergency use authorization, meaning it is no longer allowed to be used in the United States, period. Now that doesn't make sense. Check it out. Let me pull this up. COVID update. FDA limits use of certain monoclonal antibodies to treat COVID-19 due to the Omicron variant. They say, as we have throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the FDA has used the best available science, blah, blah, blah. In light of the most recent information and data available today, the FDA revised the authorizations for two monoclonal antibody treatments, bamlanivimab and etesevimab, administered together, and Regen COVID, which is casirivimab and imdevimab. Yeah, those are fun words to say. To limit their use only when the patient is likely to have been infected with or exposed to a variant that is susceptible to these treatments. Okay, so I'll back that up. I think that statement came from Florida about not allowing these treatments in the U.S. According to the FDA, they will allow it if it is the variant likely to be susceptible. So then my question is, and my question is to Florida, why shut everything down? If someone comes in and they're sick, why make an assumption? It doesn't seem like the FDA is saying outright you can't use it. They say because data show these treatments are highly unlikely to be active against the Omicron variant, which is circulating at very high frequency throughout the U.S., these treatments are not authorized for use in any U.S. states. Okay, so there it is. Territories and jurisdictions at this time. Okay, whoa. Because data show these treatments are highly unlikely to be active against the Omicron variant, which is circulating at very high frequency throughout the U.S., these treatments are not authorized for use in any U.S. states, territories, and jurisdictions. Okay, there's the clarification. Florida shuts down because the FDA has said you can't use this unless someone is exposed to the proper variant, but also because this is most likely to be the variant, you cannot use this in any jurisdictions in the U.S. In the future, if patients in certain geographic regions are likely to be infected or exposed to a variant that is susceptible to these treatments, then use of these treatments may be authorized in these regions. So that explains it. Okay. It's confusing, right? A bunch of people are coming out and they're quoting only the first part where they're like, no, the FDA is only saying you can't use it for Omicron. No, they're outright saying right there you can't use it, period, anywhere in the U.S. jurisdictions. You know what's going to happen? Rich people will just fly to Mexico. They'll fly to El Salvador. They'll fly to wherever they need to, and it'll be no issue. Within 10 hours or whatever, and a private jet. Maybe they're sick. Yeah, they're going to fly. You can't stop them. And they ain't going to be wearing a mask when they do it. They say monoclonal antibodies are laboratory-made proteins that mimic the immune system's ability to fight off harmful pathogens, such as viruses like SARS-CoV-2. Blah, blah, blah. They say SARS can mutate over time, resulting in certain treatments not working. So how about this? How about they take Omicron and they make monoclonal antibodies effective against Omicron? Why just ban these outright? Maybe that's what they're doing. Don't ask me, I don't know. They say Based on CDC prevention data, the Omicron variant of SARS is estimated to account for more than 99% of cases in the U.S. as of January. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that COVID patients seeking care in the U.S. at this time are infected with a variant other than Omicron. All right, here's a big question. How do they determine whether or not you have Omicron or not? They use PCR tests. Now, there's been a lot of people who say PCR tests can't be used to detect this. No, look, there's a lot of people who are confused. And I don't care if you're on the right or on the left. The PCR tests, my understanding is they take genetic material and they rapidly reproduce it until you can get a visible sample. This should work for viruses. Here's what they say. Swabs from PCR tests sent to labs for analysis can show if the variant looks like Omicron, Delta, or something else. They say confirming that a suspected case of Omicron requires a full genetic analysis, which takes between 4 and 5 days. By looking closely at the genetic material provided through testing, scientists can confirm whether someone is positive with Omicron or the already widely circulating Delta. So when you go and get a PCR test, the data gets sent to a lab, then within a few days, they'll determine whether or not it was Omicron. And thus, this is how the U.S. government has information on whether or not people are infected with Delta or Omicron. The problem is, for the most part, it won't matter to you as an individual. Macro scale, I see it. I guess it makes sense. But as an individual, they're going to swab you and say, yeah, it's COVID. We don't know which one. They go on to say, how is it detected? This is a very important question that I get really, really frustrated with because no one ever answers the question. Even when Joe Rogan had on Dr. Malone, Joe asked several times, how do they test for Omicron? And there was no answer, or at least none that I heard. So maybe I'm wrong, but I listened to the show and I'm left confused. Like, how do they know? Okay, here you go. We got it from the BBC. Thank you, BBC. They do a PCR test. The test looks for 3 genes relating to parts of the virus: the spike protein, the nucleocapsid, or the inner area and envelope or outer shell. So you can see these parts. Is the S gene detected? If it's not, it could be Omicron. If it is, it's unlikely. Full genus analysis is used to confirm the test. They say, what is a variant? All viruses constantly mutate, and these mutations result in new versions. Some of these can make the virus more harmful or spread more easily. The Omicron variant is VOC, variants of concern, because it has many mutations that haven't been seen before. A large number of these are on part of the virus that most vaccines target, the spike protein. This initially gives rise to concerns that existing vaccines might not be effective against Omicron. However, research from the UK Health Security Agency found that getting a booster vaccine provides 88% protection against ending up ill in the hospital, only slightly less than those against previous variants. Another study found that the risk of going to A&E or of being admitted to a hospital after catching Omicron was roughly half of the older variant, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's a very important question here. The vaccines might not be effective against Omicron. They say that. Research from the UK says maybe it is. All right. Well, that sounds to me like we have conflicting research. Of course, what you do as an individual is different from what we do as a society. Like I was saying, you getting a test, they're not going to know necessarily if you have Omicron or Delta. The big picture, they will. The individual, they won't, which is why it's important that your treatment is prescribed by a medical practitioner who can tell you about your personal life, your individual history. Because if someone comes in and they're like morbidly obese and old, doctor's going to be like, I've got a specific plan for you, right? If you are young, fit, and healthy, doctor's probably going to prescribe something very different. They're not going to tell you, get vitamin D and exercise. They're going to be like, well, you already do that. So here's what I think you should do. The point is, different strokes for different folks, right? That's why I think it's important. However, if they're going to go on the macro level and say that based on their analysis so far, they've not proven that the monoclonal antibodies are effective against Omicron, well, then shouldn't we say the same thing of vaccines? Shouldn't we be saying the same thing of any possible treatment? Whatever, man. I think you get it. And I think you can see why people are untrusting of the system. It makes no sense to remove the use of monoclonal antibodies for everyone because doctors should be deciding on an individual basis. I certainly understand, but we're getting into this position where the government and the authorization is not based on individuals. Okay. You go to a doctor, and the doctor says, based upon your medical history and the symptoms presented, we think it might be Delta. which still is around. Sorry, we can't treat you. What? That makes no sense. Why is the government interfering? Do they want that 1% to die? Yeah, I don't know, man. I certainly understand the issues around the internet and misinformation and trying to better understand how we solve for these problems. It's not so simple. There are people who put up websites all day and night that put up bad and bunk information. And, we're trying to save as many lives as possible. But this to me makes no sense. If you allow doctors to prescribe as they see fit for their individual patients, wouldn't we then at a grassroots level maximize those who are being saved? But for whatever reason, politics plays a role. Which brings me to a tale of two COVIDs from the New York Times. Take a look at this. A poll from the Morning Consult. How worried are you about getting sick from COVID within the next year? 18 to 34-year-old, the most likely to be scared about getting COVID. Now that's crazy, isn't it? Why is that? Why are young people more worried about getting COVID? They're the least likely, my understanding is they're less likely to get it, substantially less likely, and to be harmed by it compared to the 65 plus crowd that is not worried about getting it. My understanding is the vaccine isn't stopping Omicron transmission. That's why it's skyrocketing in New York. I could be wrong. I don't know, whatever. YouTube's rules make no sense. Shut up, YouTube. But that's my understanding, right? But they say it does prevent hospitalization and death. Well, getting sick from COVID, shouldn't the older generation be more worried? Because even if they are more likely to be vaccinated, they can still get it. They don't seem to care. As we deal with Omicron, I am going to make changes to my normal activity or continue my life as much as possible. Democrats are changing their lives and Republicans are not. 65, it's inverted. Only 30% of Democrats will carry on like normal, but only 30% of Republicans are going to change their daily routines. Here's where it gets interesting. How worried are you about getting sick from COVID? The unvaccinated are the least likely to be worried about getting COVID. The vaccinated are in the middle, but people with booster shots are the most worried about getting sick from COVID. It makes sense, okay? If you are worried about getting sick from COVID, you're going to go get the booster shot, right? If you're not worried about it, you're not. So it's not so much that people get the booster and they're still scared of getting it necessarily, but that probably is true as well. These people are paranoid and terrified. Even Bill Maher pointed this out. Democrats got it wrong when asked, what was the percentage of people going to the hospital with COVID? If you get COVID, what is the percentage that you will end up in the hospital? And Democrats thought it was 50%. Republicans and independents got it right. 5%. That's a lot of people going to the hospital, man. That's why I'm like, okay, this is scary stuff. I actually tried to go to the hospital as well. And then I called a doctor and got treatment. This is bad. And I got to be honest, the lingering effects of COVID, man, lasts a long time. I was still feeling it for like a month or two. It's mostly subsided now. But it's amazing that even after I got better, it's hard to describe. I felt lingering effects. I didn't feel like I was being impeded necessarily, but it was like, man, you could still feel it, probably because it does damage to your body. You get better, you feel better, you're living like normal, but you still have, damage from the virus. So, that I think I understand why people might be worried about getting it. It's not just about going to the hospital. It's not just about dying. It's about the lingering effects long COVID. But this is fascinating to me. The split in the views and the fears. Are you concerned about your children falling behind academically because of remote learning? Democrats and Republicans alike, very much concerned about this. Are you concerned about your children missing out on socialization? Democrats and Republicans alike concerned about this. Are you concerned about your children getting sick from COVID while attending in-person school? Democrats are very concerned. Republicans aren't. Republicans are fairly split, though. Do you support or oppose transitioning students from in-person school to online learning? Republicans oppose. Democrats support. But it makes sense. Democrats are in big, dense cities. Republicans aren't. This is not necessarily a political thing. And that's what's really frustrating, too, because it turns into it. Democrats living in cities think everybody should live the way they do. You shouldn't be allowed to have guns, and we're scared of COVID, so lock everyone down. And people who live in rural areas are like, leave me alone, let me have my guns, and don't lock me down. I live in the middle of nowhere. And that I understand. The problem is that Democrats think their world is the only world and everyone lives like them. No. And maybe that's why we're seeing the EUA for monoclonal antibodies be rescinded, because you have city, urban dwelling liberal types who are just like, everybody should live the way we do. No nuance. Nuance be damned. Look, I get it. People are scared. But you can't tell me how to live my life because you're scared. The risks are mine to take. I say this all the time. If I want to go bungee jumping, that's on me, not you. Screw off. If I want to go snowboarding, that's on me, not on you. If we were going to live, if we enacted policy the way we did for everything, if we enacted it for everything the way we do for Omicron, you would be locked in your house all day, never allowed to go anywhere. Because the risks, a bird could poop on you when you could get an infectious disease. A squirrel could bite you when you could get rabies. A bat could fly to nowhere and bite you. And then, oh no, you could fall down the stairs. Lock them in their home. It's time for the surrogates. You VR plug into your robot to walk around and live for you because you're too scared to go outside. And then everyone will become sickly and vitamin D deficient. No. The world has risks. The risks are mine to take. If I go to a doctor and the doctor says, you're sick, we don't know what you have, it's likely to be Omicron because that's what most people have. And I said, what's the harm in trying monoclonal antibodies? They might be like, rash, nausea, diarrhea. Some people have allergic reactions. Then it's like, okay, well, that's for me to decide, right? Will I risk those side effects if the doctor wants me to try a treatment? I've had doctors prescribe things to me before that I've said no to. And I've looked them up and I'm like, I'm not a fan of that. And they said, okay, we'll try something else. I think most people have experienced something like this. That's why doing research is important. Talk to your doctor about your medical history, your fears, what you're hoping to accomplish, all that stuff. And ultimately, I can understand why we don't want people to be getting treatments for things that won't treat what they have. That's for a doctor to decide. It's very strange to me that the monoclonal antibodies were never fully authorized. They never received full authorization, only emergency use authorization. Well, now they are no longer allowed for emergency use authorization. And they say because it doesn't work on Omicron or they haven't proven it. Well, do tests. Prove it or disprove it. Do what you can, right? I just think it's fascinating that even right now, you've got the community vaccine from Pfizer, which is FDA approved, but my understanding is that it's not available in the US. So all the vaccines are still under EUA. You know what, man? I don't know. Talk to a doctor. I can only say I can certainly see why people are no longer trusting of the system. YouTube will ban you for, seriously, if I just read the article from Financial Times, YouTube would probably give me a strike for misinformation. They still might. I don't know what the rules are. They make no sense. No one has any idea. Y'all have lost your minds. I'm talking about the establishment, not you guys watching. I'm saying the establishment. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all then. Maybe. Whatever. Maybe not.